Sex workers at Reddit, what was the saddest request you have ever received? This was a long time ago. But for an hour of his 90-minute session he just sat there and talked about his ex-wife who hated him. He also asked me if he should stop financially supporting his stepson because he wouldn't stop smoking weed in his house. Then read me some poetry he wrote about his ex-wife. I never saw him again, but he emailed me more of his poetry afterwards. I once had someone who gave me $250 a week to just talk and smoke weed with him. No sex at all. He was very lonely because his wife passed and just wanted female company. One day he broke down during one of our hangouts saying how much he wished his wife was here. I just let him cry while I held him. Probably not the saddest, but it's the most recent one. Guy gave me $300 every 2 weeks just to text him and treat him nicely. No physical contact. No nudes or sexting. Literally just wanted good morning and good night texts. And someone to encourage him as far as work and his hobbies went. In my younger days, I worked at a mail review. I had this woman of about 40 something who would come in fairly regularly. She asked me to a dinner date. I obliged her request, as she was quite attractive. About 5 minutes in, she started bawling. And when I asked what's the matter, she told me I was an exact replica of her son whom she lost to cancer. She proceeded to show me pictures. And TBH, the resemblance was uncanny. We chatted over the years since. But in 2018 she passed of cancer. R.I.P. Not one in particular, but I have had a few clients who were severely disabled. Like in the way that they were paralyzed and required mechanical ventilation. It makes me super frustrated and sad for these gents because they still need a physical touch that isn't a medical necessity. They still have desires and wants. But they are literally trapped because they can't go anywhere on their own and because of the stigma of S work. They don't think their family would allow a FSSW to visit. The first client I ever saw asked me to spit in his mouth and tell him I loved him. Afterwards he told me his dad had cancer. And he took out a photo album and we looked at pictures of his dad's youth. Maybe you look like his dad? You might be the spitting image of him? This is a different kind of interaction of similar tone. And I had a phone sex client. It became clear after a few calls that I think his only interactions were online and involved giving money for attention back. I don't know if he had the means to keep this up or not. But he got very weird around the 5th call. Upset I wasn't online as much to talk. Wanted to talk all throughout the day, and when he couldn't afford it would try to haggle me lower in price. I told him that this amount isn't healthy for the mind and he should seek therapy. I was diagnosed with PTSD and had wonderful therapy that changed my life around. He got upset at me and blocked me. 2 days later, I wake up to text messages asking me to take him back. He sent photos of the front and back of all of his credit cards to prove he was serious. I felt so bad for him. I'm a guy who shoots PRN. So technically a sex worker. I've got some requests of PH users who sent me some messages. One guy just wanted me to shoot a girl who would say hi. John. I changed the name. I love you, John. I miss you, John, and so on. I guess this guy has nobody who talks to him. My name is John. And I hate every single one of you. I could go on for days. Can't tell you how many men I've seen on the brink of devastation who just needed a listening ear and a warm touch. People are fragile creatures. Edit. Just hold me. Please. Silent tears ensued. IDK if this counts, but I sell foot pics and I used to have this one customer who was the nicest guy ever. He was pretty young, only like a couple of years older than me. I'm 20. And overall just super guilty about his kink. He would always pay me really well and was overly polite. He would pay me extra and for my pedicures. And never was demanding about anything. Which is super rare. We would have long conversations where I would try to convince him that liking feet was a mild kink and nothing to worry about. He never really got over the guilt though. He came from an extremely Catholic family, so he was super repressed. Overall nicest customer guy I've ever met. would shower me in compliments, and our relationship honestly just felt like a friendship. Not my story, but someone else's that somehow stuck with me. Owner of an escort service who shared a story of a guy who apparently was from a wealthy family, but as a child hardly ever saw his parents. He was raised by an au pair or nanny with beautiful long hair which he always combed for her as a kid. Into puberty he had got aroused from combing it. She noticed and gave him his first sexual experience. Since then the man always requested girls with long hair and only wanted to comb it and then get a hand job. Kinda sad thinking about all the parental love he missed and trying to compensate like this. WTF, so the nanny sorely abused him? I'm starting to get an impression that sex work is closer to therapy than just sex. I received a message from a submissive man asking me to make him my slave. It's not an outlandish request when you're a sex worker involved with kink. But I don't consider myself dominant at all, so I politely declined the request. He replied and tried to bribe me with a tribute. Expensive gifts. And it eventually escalated with him saying he'd take his life for me. This man was not a regular or customer I had interacted with before. It caught me off guard. I'd like to think it was just some desperate cry for attention and fulfilling a mistress-slave fantasy. But it really made me uncomfortable. Also, a lot of submissive men who message random women to be their mistress usually have no concern for safety or sanity during scenes. So even if I was interested in taking on that role, it would not have been worth the money or stress. A rabbi, during our sessions, spent most of his time questioning his faith, asking me for my opinion on the proof of God. I don't believe in God. I told him that he needs to be brave and not practice something he does not believe in. He would agree. Get a hand job, put on his religious cloths and schedule another appointment where the exact same scenario played out. It felt like the Twilight Zone with him. Had this old man just come in and who literally brought food for us to eat and just chat because he was lonely. He wanted to make me the beneficiary of his life insurance, then have me go to Colombia separately from him, meet up with him and kill him erotically. I'm still not sure if he was being serious or wanted to kill me. He did say he had a degenerative disease that'd leave him completely paralyzed in a few years. And he did have me use some wire mesh condom on a big dildo up his ass until I got uncomfortable with how bloody he was getting. He wanted me to continue sanding his hole. At least he tipped really well afterwards. Well, that ride didn't have any breaks. My wife is a dancer and the saddest story she told me was about a Syrian, I think, refugee. He'd been in America for 2 years waiting on paperwork for his family to follow him and immigrate. He felt really guilty for being there but was really lonely and just wanted a hug to be held for human contact. This is such a sadly beautiful thread. Thanks for the question. And to all those who shared their stories. I DK about sad, but I'm a go-go dancer and I have, well before corona, a guy who pays me to choke and slap him. Like as hard as I can. I left a mark. Another guy likes dancers to win an empty beer bottle and bring it to him. He will literally start chugging it before you even walk away. It's so disgusting. I refuse to touch him or do a dance with him. But I'll pee in a bottle for $40. One of the saddest I guess is a guy who used to give me $400 $500 every night he would come. And not sad because of anything he asked me to do, but because he was a 50-year-old with a wife and no kids who was secretly gay. He would come to the bar and pay me $500 just to sit with him and talk. He was pretty quiet and he barely even touched me. Like a few replies in this thread, I've done my fair share of counseling with guys who are in relationships, marriages that they absolute hate but can't leave for some reason. I do my best to listen but try to avoid giving out advice. Always needed to be careful giving advice to guys who I just had sex with. Heard stories of escorts who had done that and the guy has taken as an invitation to leave their wife for the escort. Saddest for me was the guy who was incredibly excited at the thought of bringing me some of his wife's clothes to wear for our next session. She was very much alive. I don't know what the thrill was, but it wasn't for me. Avoided his calls after that. I don't know why, but I was honestly expecting to read some story about a guy who just lost his wife and didn't want to be alone for a night. Instead, the first thing I see is guy cried because sex worker didn't want to shove pencils into his dick hole. Man, people are freaky deaky. At one point, I worked as a dominatrix in a Nick dungeon. There was some older guy that came in and asked to meet me for a pre-session interview to see if we matched. He asked me if I had any dental experience and wanted me to remove some of his teeth. He said that his insurance wouldn't cover some dental work he needed, and that if he had teeth that were worse, then it would be covered. I politely declined and did not do a session with him. Apparently, this guy was pretty famous throughout the Nick scene and had asked the same request of many pros. I always wondered if he actually needed the dental work done, or if it was just some fetish. I'd be much happier to believe he got off on this and didn't actually think going to sex workers was a good method for dentistry. I dated a working dominatrix for a couple of years, and one of her regular customers would lock himself in the bathroom and cry while she pleaded with him to come out. Same routine every time. She'd go to his house, knock on the door, he'd open it, run to the bathroom, lock the door and start crying. When the hour was up, he'd come out, pay her, say thank you very much and schedule next week's appointment. Always reminded me of the Looney Tunes cartoon with the sheepdog and coyote stamping their time cards before and after a busy day of trying to kill each other. I only do online work, and I sometimes feel sad about the humiliation vid requests I get. There was a guy who wanted me to call him his slave, ask him to put his head in the toilet, do my things and flush it down. He offered me good money for it, but I couldn't take something like this up. Not a sex worker, dancer, and not the craziest story, but I had a guy ask me to hit him with his belt, hard AF, my shoes, stomp on his genitals and completely berate him. He got like crazy intense each time I would too. His reaction actually scared me sometimes cause he would get in my face with hella intensity, and I remember thinking, this dude is knock me TF out. He was big. Close bracket. I did it. Got paid nicely. And I would love to say I was all about it, but I wasn't. It is just not my thing at all. Edit: if being stripper qualifies me as being a sex worker and I can put my story on here, then good. I was trying to avoid the opposite backlash actually, lol. Giving my story as a stripper and someone being like you're not a sex worker. It doesn't count. I don't know, I'm just trying to follow the rules of the post. Don't be mad at me. Not me, but a friend who cams. A guide met her and asked for a 30-minute video call. She said yes and they went on Discord. But instead of anything else, the guy just asked how her day was and continued to have an honest conversation for an hour. When he said he had to go, he asked how much he owed her and she refused any payment. Had a woman break down in front of me and I comforted her. She told me how she had been hiding her sexuality and had finally got out of a loveless marriage with kids and felt like she had wasted her life. The general consensus on this thread is men need emotional attention and society seems to be unwilling to give it. It's real and sad. Since this sounds like a good topic, did any of you notice an increased demand of your service due to lockdowns and the pandemic? Especially cam girls. Since most other interactions would be rather unhealthy and defy the idea of the lockdown. I'm a stripper. Not full service. But I sell nudes and I've noticed an uptick in dudes begging me to cut my prices because it's a pandemic and they've been laid off. It's like, if you've been laid off, then maybe go buy groceries instead of a titty pic and stop asking me to take a cut in my paycheck for you. As for camming, there's sort of a market saturation going on right now. Because so many in-person SWAs have turned to camming to try and make ends meet. It's pretty rough. I can't wait for all of this to be over. Edit. I know it's cliche, but this is my first award. I had a client who was quite wealthy. Our first date went really well and afterwards we sent each other some memes. Because they were from one of the topics we'd talked about. For 2 months. He booked me every single week for an overnight date, $2,000 per date. He also bought me gifts and books he knew I'd enjoy. Anyway, after 6 dates, he wanted to gift me a beautiful ring and told me he loves me. I was really uncomfortable and told him that while I do enjoy his company, it's still nothing serious and basically just business for both of us. He started crying and told me about how I look and act like his ex-fiancée registered sign who killed herself and he wanted to make himself and me happy. When I told him that I can't and won't replace his dead girlfriend, he cried again and offered me even more money to pretend being her. I didn't accept his offer. Went home and blocked his number. The mass of human lead lives of quiet desperation. I remember when I was a curious kid seeing HBO's Cat House, the series on, and thinking, oh man, that's basically PRN. And watching an episode because, well, you're a kid assuming it will be SY. Most definitely not SY. The episode I watched was some guy paying to just lay down and be held by one of the workers. They spooned, talked, and he gave her a foot massage. Made me feel really bad. Even at 13. Usually the requests themselves aren't sad. It's the conversations that I have with them. I had a guy buy panties and videos from me and just spoil me. He'd randomly send me Amazon gift cards and money and at one point even bought me a ring. We also just talked a lot in a non-sexual way. I eventually found out that he was in an unhappy marriage and trying to get the connection that he wasn't getting from his wife. I don't know if he spoiled me because he wanted the feeling of treating a woman or if he was trying to buy my affections. Ultimately, he told me that he'd talked with his wife and that they were getting a divorce and thanked me for the role that I, unintentionally, played in that. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind Gertrude and Thelma about our confidentiality agreements. A guy with severe mobility issues had a house fire that burned his spine and disabled him intellectually, like stroke type brain damage, as well as physically, and bouncers had to help him go to the bathroom. Younger than my father. He wanted conversation because he lost his family in the fire and was just waiting to die basically as his hands were scarred and useless. He couldn't work or take up hobbies as his memory and brain function were also impaired. He would start out okay but start crying and bawling under the absolute burden he knows he is now to society as he was a successful family man. He always stunk bad and rarely had more than a couple dollars. I always tried talking to him, but he would get upset that I couldn't just stay and talk low end. Yeah, I have to make money too. I am scrounging as is, because I don't think he understood where he was sometimes until his memory reset and he recalled. He never drank but never remembered spending his money either. It was like a goldfish. It was heartbreaking. Was asked to just hug a girl on my chest, occasionally kissing her forehead. Her brother died in a car crash I think and she had no one else. Edit. Wow, didn't expect this to get so many upvotes. Thanks guys. Close bracket. Edit 2. My highest upvoted comment. Thank you guys so much. 3. Edit 3. Thank you so much for the awards, generous strangers. I work this guy that is in his 50s. He has a 1970s bowl cut and wears dad jeans pulled up way too high. Anyway, he told another co-worker of mine he takes a 2-week vacation every year and pays a hooker spend the whole 2 weeks him. Like he rents a hotel room. They go out to eat, run errands, and she pretends to be his wife. He never mentioned if he has SXW her, but he did admit to them holding hands in public. Little pecks on the cheek while walking together. But that's at it. I felt bad when I heard at it. Notice how many of these examples are just lonely dudes looking for some love and compassion from a woman. This thread is just so sad. I hate that men are treated as they do not have emotions themselves. And they can't open up in front of friends and family because of the masculinity image we as a society put up. Not one myself, but I know a few. The most interesting thing to me is that they are not all 22-year-old hotties. There are some mature ladies at brothels in NV who have regular clients who want NSA or massages and usually a lot of talking, easy companionship. It is sad to me the huge number of people who are just plain lonely for touch and time. A man in his late 90s, who a co-worker described as skin on a coat hanger, just wanted to be held. His wife had passed away 30 plus years ago and he missed human touch. None of us saw him again, so I think he passed away shortly thereafter. I'm a stripper, if you count that amongst walkers. The saddest thing to me is that people seem to expect that it's always gross or sad. There are a lot of different ways to be a stripper and I can only speak to my own experiences. There's a lot of stigma around it and all kinds of sex work, at least in the US. But I wish people could see without so much judgment how healing this type of work can be for both the clientele and the provider. Many of my clients are especially rigorous also come to see me as much for the emotional intimacy as well as physical intimacy. It makes me sad that so many straight men don't feel like they can be emotionally vulnerable or intimate unless it's with a S-or partner, or, in my case, a SI stand-in. But at the same time I am really touched to be there for some of them and hold that kind of space. Saddest sex worker request of all time still has to be from Young Guns Charlie Mama, I just want you to hold me. Hello robotic YouTubers. Edit number 001. Mandatory speech of gratitude. I have a friend who's a sex worker. She told me a story of an old man who requested getting his nipples licked and bitten. She tried getting it done quickly and go to sex in order to get done with. But he wouldn't allow and keep asking for her to continue. He'd constantly be like, no. Bite harder. Lick more. Which made her angry and she gave him the hardest bite she could possibly do to hurt him. Only to have him rejoice in pleasure. Yes baby. Like that. She sort of built up the request. Initially she asked for a conversation. She then broke into tears, from which I hugged her. She didn't seem to let go and simply clinged onto me. Her request for physical contact was kisses on the forehead. I didn't charge her. Edit. Thank you generous stranger for the award. It's sad how the things can be hard for men as well. I am a woman but I'm aware how men are forced to be strong all the time. To be always willing to have sex. To be the responsible for start a conversation. A relationship or even to keep financially everything. It's really too much to take. One time somebody wanted to pay me to have consensual sex for the sole purpose of procreation. You know that actually is weird in that context. I didn't know sounding was a thing but now I'm disturbed. Nothing too bad that I can recall. One guy always asked me to in his mouth and 2 different Indian guys wanted to spit in my mouth. Declined all 3 but one of those Indian guys did spit on me. Still want to kill that guy. I do have a sad one I just thought of but it's legitimately sad, not weird and pathetic. Share it now. I had this one guy want to get naked. Only wearing sailor hats. And we get in a hot tub filled with Pepto-Bismol. He wanted to clip my toenails and then he wanted me to shave his buttocks. Epic Redditors of Redditland. Have you ever SXSXS time SX? What SXSX hand job? Petition to rename this sub to our Ask Reddit about sex. I'm super curious where all these SX workers are. I have never come across this line of work in my real life. Unless we're talking about all those ads for SI women near you. You won't usually run across SX workers in your life unless you go looking for them. And they don't brag about it when you see them at the store. Likely you've seen or been around many a SX worker. But they wear jeans and a t-shirt to the store like everyone else. When you're not working, you don't wear your uniform. I remember back in 2004 I was arrested for prostitution. Big whoop. It happens. My pimp hired this sleazy lawyer to get us off. And this guy was a piece of work. Quick talking. Ugly suits. Kinda meek behind the facade though. He was effective though. My girlfriend and I left the courthouse in time for the lunch rush. But then he chases after us. Asking us for an hour of our time. Here we go. But no. He wants us to frame some guy. We won't say no to money. We'd go to this fancy restaurant and start confronting this guy, Howie, in front of all of his buddies, saying he owes us money and we're not leaving without it. It was funny at the time, but I felt a little bad afterwards for the lawyer and who he was framing. Wish I knew the story between them.